Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. We're delighted to have with us on this very critical issue the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for having me.
Have you been briefed yet by the administration on any aspect of this?
I have not. I will acknowledge Senator or Secretary Rubio did try to reach me in the middle of the night Saturday after the strike had started, and he did. We weren't able to connect, and I will be being briefed in the Gang of Eight meeting later today. And boy, oh boy, I got a lot of questions.
Absolutely. But to be clear, the president launched this war, and he can call it whatever he wants, but it's a war. It's a military action against a sovereign state without consulting with you or your counterpart on the House side. Do you know if he consulted with any Republicans?
I am not aware whether anyone was consulted beforehand. I will say this. I mean, I know Secretary Rubio, and remember, Marco was my colleague and friend on the Intelligence Committee. We worked well together. Somehow making the comment, well, this kind of stuff could leak. Yes, if you gave it to all 535 folks, all the House and all the Senate, that is the reason why on classified actions, on covert activities, there's a group called the Gang of Eight, which is the Speaker and the Minority Leader, the Majority Leader, and Minority Leader, and the heads of the Intelligence Committee. And that group has never leaked. And when we're talking about here, we've got 20% of our total fleet off the coast of Venezuela. We've got 15,000 soldiers and sailors. We sent in the Delta Force. We're also supposed to be informed of any significant intelligence activities going on. None of that took place, and it's fairly jaw-dropping. And what particularly bothers me is, even beyond the kind of legality is, if you accept the administration's argument that somehow this was just a legal action, which doesn't pass the smell test, under that theory of the case, why couldn't Vladimir Putin go in and snatch Zelensky because he had violated Russian law? Why couldn't he go snatch the president of Poland? Why could not President Xi take Taiwan? Because Chinese communist law has had for 50 years that Taiwan is a splinter province. Where does this end under this theory of the case, which is why I think the theory of the case is just flat wrong?
It may be a little confusing to folks because I thought he was indicating when he was striking the boats, ostensibly because they were narco terrorists, that was not a law enforcement matter, that this was some kind of military matter. And now he's turned around and said the use of lethal force on the sovereignty of a independent nation is not military, but is instead law enforcement. Is there something screwy here?
Yeah, there's something very screwy. I mean, it just doesn't pass the smell test. If another nation state had 20% of its navy in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay and they were flying helicopters at the White House to try to extract our president, what would we call that? We'd call that war. We'd call that military. It's absurd to make the case otherwise. And I don't think it even in kind of Trumpian unlogic, this doesn't pass a smell test. And then we can talk the action itself, but then we go to the second phase, which was even further stunning, that we're going to run the country. And we're going to run it by having this armada offshore, which I don't understand. And, the idea is that we're going to have it paid for by Venezuelan oil. We had that same promise made about Iraqi oil when we went into Iraq. But the situation that here in Venezuela is even worse because Maduro was such a bad guy and so inefficient. The Venezuelan oil operations had degraded about 75%. Used to be 4 million barrels a day they'd export. Now it's 1 million. That it would take years, literally, to rebuild that capacity. Are we going to keep this armada off the coast of Venezuela for years? It just doesn't. There's not a case to be made here that passes a smell test.
Right. Now, the Constitution specifies that treaties, like the UN treaty, are part of the supreme law of the land. He clearly has violated that because the UN Charter prevents wars of aggression and further prevents essentially taking over another country and operating it. The Constitution also gives the Congress the power to declare war. Where are we constitutionally? And in a sane period of time, wouldn't your Republican colleagues, if a Democrat ever dreamed of doing this, be screaming for impeachment and removal of the president? How is
Yeah.
this even possible?
Well, Jen, you ask uh, a, a, a great question. I mean, remember, we set up this system because we were tired of one man rule in the case of George III back at the time of the Revolution. And you, we now seem to be defaulting back to one man rule. And it's, even again, if you try to give the president the benefit of all the doubt, he's also now saying, and next on the list will be countries like Colombia and potentially even Mexico, both countries, whether we like their leaders or not, they've been democratically elected by their own population. So where does this end? And to your comment about my Republican colleagues, I know many of them, care very deeply about our country. And I know how, I was so hoping that in the aftermath of the elections around the country, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, and other actions, they were finding their voice. If they simply roll over at this point and don't exercise their obligation to do appropriate oversight and take back some power, then I don't know how our country fully recovers.
Absolutely. Um, what are some of the things, since impeachment is not going to be happening with the Republicans, that you might entreat Republicans to do? Those who say that they're for democracy, those who say that they're really about narco terrorism. What are the kinds of proposals that might wean them away from this and put some structure around what Donald Trump's going to do next?
You got the $1 million question there. Some of it would be consistency, so that if we're saying drug traffickers are bad, and they are, how do you then have a individual accused of the similar type crimes as Maduro, the former president of Honduras, President Hernandez, who was prosecuted under American law in American courts? How do you then just completely dismiss his pardon by President Trump? It's beyond hypocrisy. It takes away any moral standing we have. You could ask that. You could also, Congress has the right of the power of the purse to hold off funding for issues if and those are pressures to be put in place. I also, coming back to just the raw politics, President Trump was elected in many ways because he said he was going to get us out of all these foreign wars. He's now in a military action against a neighboring country. He's threatening military actions against other countries in our hemisphere. It appears he wants to go back to a 1950s kind of area of influence. And we spent 70 years under Democrats and Republicans alike trying to, in terms of treating countries in Central America and South America as partners rather than us as a colonial power. He seems to want to go back to that. I do not believe that is what the voters who voted for Donald Trump were expecting. So if there's not the willingness now, where you've got legal arguments, moral arguments, and what appears to be even crass political arguments, the Republican base not supporting this, if they don't take this opportunity now, my gosh, where do we head?
You raised the upcoming briefings. What are some of the questions that you are interested in finding answers to? Americans probably are stunned to find out that we're now running a foreign country, that we're going to take oil. What are some of the questions that you want answers to?
Well, I want to answer a question of how is their justification of an argument that you can take out these leaders. What would they? I want to hear what they would respond if Putin does that, not only in Ukraine but elsewhere, or Xi takes Taiwan. How do we have any immoral standings to push back? Number one. Number two, how do you run a country from an armada offshore? Number three, are we going to, this idea of we're going to recoup all these costs from Venezuela, from their oil, when the oil infrastructure is in such bad shape? How long are they committed in this activity? Point four, some people have made the analogy to Panama when they took out Noriega. But in Panama, we had lots of, we knew what was going on in the country, even though the canal had been turned over to the Panamanians. We still had a major presence. We've not had even a State Department mission there now for years. So we are so flying blind in Venezuela. How do you situate this? And then the idea that the interim President Rodriguez, who they say they can do business with. I've been briefed on Venezuela a number of times when we talked about, what next after Maduro. I never heard any brief that said, well, that vice president, she's somebody we can do business with. So I got all of those questions. And I'm sure a number of my colleagues are going to have more of the legal question. I'm not, there are better lawyers than me going to be in that room. They can make those arguments, but just, what is the precedent? And oh my God, if you were trying to actually do this process, how do you carry it off?
Well, Senator, we know your time is short today, and we thank you for taking time out, as always, to keep us up to speed. We're going to be talking to you a lot, I suspect,
A
in
lot
the
more to
coming
come.
weeks. And best of luck defending what's left of our Constitution and trying to bring
Thank
some
you, Jen.
sense to the other side of the aisle. I'm not sure which is harder, but both are
Thank you.
essential.
Thank you, Jen, for being in the fight as well. Take care.
Take care.